Memory connection. Opening. You know, this story reminds me of a fella I knew back in Arizona territory during times when a man's word and his backbone were about all he could truly call his own. Name of Luke Mercer. Tall drink of water, kept to himself mostly. Weren't much for talking, but his hands were as honest as a preacher on Sunday, and twice as useful. The kind who could build a cabin tight enough to keep winter where it belongs, or track game across bare rock if he had to. Luke wasn't looking for trouble, nor was he looking for family. Like many a good man, he'd had his fill of both. But sometimes the good Lord has other plans, and he sends exactly what you ain't looking for. And that's when a man's true character shows itself. When he's got to choose between the easy path and the right one. This here's a story about standing your ground when the chips are down and finding family where you least expect it. Luke Mercer's axe bit deep into the pine log, each swing precise as clockwork. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the October chill. His weathered hands, crisscrossed with old scars, worked with the confidence that comes from doing one thing well for 30-odd years. The pile of split wood grew steadily, enough to see him through the coming winter with some to spare. Luke wasn't a man who left things to chance, particularly when Arizona winters were concerned. He'd seen men die from poor planning. Pausing to wipe his brow, Luke surveyed his homestead with quiet satisfaction. The cabin wasn't fancy, just squared logs chinked with mud and moss, but it was solid, built by his own hands 5 years back, after he'd had enough of working other men's land for other men's profit. The stable housed one good horse and a temperamental mule that was worth its ornery hide for hauling. The garden had yielded well this year. Make do with what you have, but make sure you have what you need. His father's words, spoken when Luke was knee-high to a grasshopper. One of the few useful things the old man had given him before the drink took what was left of his sense. Twice a month, Luke would ride into the settlement of Copper Creek for supplies. Wasn't much of a town, general store, saloon, a sad excuse for a church, and a dozen or so buildings clinging to the hillside like lichen to rock. Folks were decent enough, though they'd learned not to pry into Luke's business. He paid his debts prompt, never caused trouble, and occasionally helped when extra hands were needed for barn raising or roundups. "Mornin', Mercer," Ellis from the general store would say, and Luke would nod back. That was about the extent of most conversations, which suited Luke fine. A man could breathe out here without the weight of others' expectations pressing down on him. As the sun dipped toward the western ridge, Luke's head came up sharp as a hunting dog's. Something wasn't right. The birds had gone quiet, and there was a smell on the wind that didn't belong. Smoke, yes, but something else. Fear, maybe. His hand moved to the knife at his belt as he scanned the tree line. Then he heard it, a child's scream echoing through the pines, followed by the unmistakable howl of a wolf. 3 days after the wolf incident, Luke led his mule into Copper Creek for supplies. He needed more coffee, flour, and now something for 2 young Apache girls with hollow eyes who huddled in his cabin with their exhausted mother. The general store's porch held the usual collection of old-timers perched like weathered crows on the bench. "Mornin', Luke," said old Jenkins, tamping tobacco into his pipe. Luke nodded, tipping his hat. These men had survived everything from Indian wars to mining accidents. They didn't waste words, and they didn't suffer fools. In that way, at least, Luke respected them. Inside, Ellis was weighing sugar for Mrs. Patterson, whose pinched face suggested the price was too dear. "Be with you directly, Mercer," Ellis called. Luke moved to the back corner where he always stood, back to the wall, eyes on the door. Old habits. Ellis finished with Mrs. Patterson and approached. The usual? That, plus some calico, if you've got it, and something sweet, Luke said, his voice rough from disuse. Ellis's eyebrows climbed toward his balding pate. Calico and sweets, that's a new direction for you. Luke just looked at him, steady as a rock. I don't pry into a man's business, Ellis said, raising his palms. Just making conversation. 3 pounds of coffee instead of 1, Luke continued. Extra flour, beans. Salt pork. Ellis began gathering items, curiosity plain on his face like words on a page. Heard there was trouble up near your place, Sheriff Taylor said, materializing beside the counter. Peterson's boy claimed he saw smoke signals. No trouble, Luke said. Just a cooking fire. Cooking fire, huh? The sheriff scratched his graying beard. Folks are jumpy since those raids down south. Nothing to be jumpy about, Luke said flatly. Ellis glanced between them, then spoke. Luke's never brought trouble to our door. If he says it's nothing, I believe him. Several nods from the old-timers by the stove. Luke had helped most of them. Fixed old Jenkins' roof last winter, pulled Dawson's wagon from the creek during spring floods, never asked for payment beyond a hot meal. As Luke loaded his supplies, he noticed Miller and his sons watching from across the street. Bad blood there. Miller wanted Luke's water rights and made no secret of it. Now Miller leaned close to his eldest boy, whispering something that made the younger man's face darken as he stared at Luke. Some folks just can't mind their own business. Luke was halfway home when he met Doc Simmons heading back to town, medical bag bouncing against his saddle. The old doctor had been delivering Sanchez's new baby out at the ranch. "Mercer," Doc called, reining in his mare. "Good timing. Wanted a word." Luke stopped, waiting. The doctor had patched him up once after a brush with rustlers, never asked questions about the old bullet scars, one of the few men Luke genuinely respected in these parts. "Something on your mind, Doc?" Doc glanced around before speaking, voice low. "Miller's been running his mouth at the saloon. Says you're harboring renegade Apaches. Says it's a danger to everyone." Luke's jaw tightened. Nothing renegade about a woman and 2 little girls half-starved and running from wolves. "I figured as much." Doc nodded. "But Miller's gathered some like minds, Chapman, Reynolds, that lot, men with more ammunition than sense." "Appreciate the warning." Luke shifted in his saddle. "There's more," Doc continued. "Army patrol came through yesterday. Lieutenant mentioned they're looking for Apache stragglers from Red Hawk's band. Seems they scattered after that business at Whitewater Creek." Luke recognized the name. The Army had surrounded Red Hawk's people at the creek 3 months back. Newspapers called it a battle. Those who knew better called it what it was, a massacre, women and children included. "My business is my own," Luke said evenly. "That it is." Doc nodded. "Just thought you should know what's brewing." Luke considered the old man. "You telling me to turn them out?" Doc seemed to age 10 years in that moment. "I've seen too much death, Mercer. Patched too many wounds that didn't need inflicting." He straightened in his saddle. "I'm telling you to be careful. And if that woman or those children need medical attention, you send word, day or night." Luke nodded, a fraction of movement. "Much obliged, Doc." As Luke rode the final miles home, his mind worked like a well-oiled Colt action. Nia and her girls couldn't travel yet. The youngest still had fever. Turning them out wasn't an option. But neither was rolling over for Miller and his kind. Sometimes a man had to plant his feet and stand his ground. Seemed like that time had come again. A week passed, quiet as falling snow. The younger girl, Winona, recovered her strength. Tala helped Luke with small chores around the cabin, while Naya kept their home in better order than Luke had managed in 5 years of bachelor living. They settled into an uneasy rhythm, like dancers who didn't know the steps but were determined not to tread on each other's toes. Then came the pounding on the door just after dawn. Luke had the Winchester in hand before his feet hit the floor, motioning for Naya to take the girls to the back room. Miller stood on the porch, flanked by his 2 grown sons and Chapman from the sawmill. All armed, though their rifles weren't raised. Yet. "Mercer," Miller said, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a rattler's warning. "State your business," Luke replied, not inviting them in. Miller's smile never reached his eyes. "Neighborly concern is all. Word is you've got some guests. My business is my own. Not when it puts the whole settlement at risk." Miller's facade dropped. "Those Apache have been raiding farms down south. Armies hunting them. Woman and 2 little girls," Luke said evenly. "Not exactly a war party." Chapman spat tobacco juice over the railing. "They all stick together, probably sending signals to their menfolk right now." Luke's grip tightened on the Winchester. "You boys said your piece. Now get off my land." Miller's face darkened. "We got families to protect, Mercer. You live alone, might not understand that." "I understand the difference between right and wrong," Luke said. "Seems you're a bit foggy on that." "Committees forming in town," Miller said. "Sheriff's involved now. This ain't over." Luke stood unmoved. "Doors that way." As they mounted up, Miller called back. "Army patrols due through next week. Be a shame if they found something they weren't looking for." Luke watched until they disappeared down the trail, then closed the door. Naya stood in the hallway, her face impassive, but her eyes knowing. "They will come back," she said. It wasn't a question. Luke nodded. "Reckon so. We should leave." "Winter's coming," Luke said simply. "You wouldn't make it." That evening, after the girls were asleep, Luke and Nia sat by the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters like a ghost trying to get in. Inside, the cabin was warm, smelling of pine smoke and the rabbit stew they'd had for supper. Luke whittled a small piece of pine, his knife strokes precise and thoughtful. Nia worked a piece of deerskin with a bone needle, repairing a tear in Winona's moccasin. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just cautious, like wild creatures sharing the same watering hole. "Why do you live alone?" Naya asked finally, her voice low so as not to wake the children. Luke's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their steady rhythm. "Prefer it that way. No one prefers to be alone," she said, not looking up from her stitching. A ghost of a smile touched Luke's weathered face. "You calling me a liar?" "Yes." She met his eyes then, unafraid. "My people say a man without family is like a tree without roots. First strong wind, he falls." Luke set down his whittling. "Had roots once. They got pulled up." "The war?" He shook his head. "After, wife and boy took fever. Nothing to be done about it." Naya's hands went still. "I am sorry." "Long time ago now," Luke said, though the words came out rough, like they'd caught on something sharp in his throat. 10 years this winter. Is why you help us, because you lost your family." Luke stared into the fire. "Maybe, or maybe just because it needed doing." "My husband was killed at Whitewater Creek," Nia said, returning to her stitching. "Many of our people died there. Those who lived were taken to the reservation. We escaped during the night march." "Why not go to the reservation?" Luke asked. "My mother was Mexican," Nia said. "My father Apache. I am not welcome among either people. The soldiers would separate me from my daughters. Send them to school far away. Make them forget who they are." Luke nodded, understanding. People feared what was different, what they couldn't sort neatly into familiar boxes. He'd seen it during the war. men reduced to uniforms, not human beings. Blue or gray, nothing in between. The world liked its lines clearly drawn. Folks around here, he said slowly, they've got long memories when it comes to raids and such. Won't be easy. 3 days later, Luke rode into Copper Creek for supplies. The settlement felt different, conversation stopping when he approached, stares following him down the street. Even the hitching posts seemed unwelcoming, somehow. Outside the general store, the usual bench warmers were conspicuously absent. Inside, Ellis barely met his eyes as he filled Luke's order. When Luke placed coin on the counter, the storekeeper's hand trembled slightly. "Something on your mind, Ellis?" Luke asked quietly. Ellis glanced toward the back of the store, then leaned forward. "Committee meeting at the church yesterday. You were the main topic." Before Luke could respond, the door opened. Sheriff Taylor entered, followed by Reverend Parker and 3 other men, including Miller. "Mercer," the sheriff nodded. "All official business now. Need a word." "Saying it right here?" Luke asked, not moving. "Community's concerned," Reverend Parker interjected, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man used to delivering bad news with a blessing attached. "Those Indians you're harboring—" "Woman and 2 children," Luke corrected. "Be that as it may," the Reverend continued, "their presence puts us all at risk. The Army's still hunting Apache from the Whitewater incident." "Renegades," Miller added, eyes hard. "Killers." Luke's voice was steel wrapped in flannel. "You ever actually met an Apache, Miller? Or just the ones in those penny dreadfuls your boy reads?" Miller's face flushed. "My cousin's farm was raided last spring. Found him with his scalp gone. Wife and daughter both." "That's enough," Sheriff Taylor interrupted. "Point is, Mercer, the committee's made a decision. Those Indians need to be gone by week's end." Luke surveyed the men before him, men he'd known for years, traded with, occasionally shared drinks with. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger. "Or what?" he asked quietly. The sheriff sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Army patrols due through. They find those Indians on your place. Won't just be them getting arrested." "Harboring fugitives," Reverend Parker added. "Criminal offense." Luke gathered his supplies deliberately, unhurried. "Appreciate your concern for my legal standing," he said, voice dry as creek bed in August. "But last I checked, this was still a free country. Man's home is his castle and all that." As he reached the door, Sheriff Taylor spoke again. "You're making a mistake, Luke." Luke paused, hand on the latch. "Wouldn't be my first," he said, "but turning away folks in need. That'd be a mistake I couldn't live with." The first snow came early that year, heavy and unforgiving. One morning Luke woke to a world transformed. White as far as the eye could see, trees bowed under the weight of it. The temperature dropped so fast that the creek froze solid overnight, trapping leaves and twigs in its glassy grip. Inside the cabin, their breath made clouds in the morning air until the fire could be built up. With snow blocking the trail to town, they were cut off completely. Luke took stock of their supplies with a careful eye, flour running low, coffee nearly gone, salt pork enough for maybe 2 weeks. The rabbit snares had yielded less and less as the weather worsened. "We will need to stretch what we have," Nia observed, watching him count the remaining jars of preserves. Luke nodded. "Been through leaner times." But that was when he'd had only 1 mouth to feed, not 4. And the girls needed more than just survival. They needed strength, especially with the threat of Miller and his kind still hanging over them. "My people know hunger," Nia said, reading his thoughts. "We will manage." Nia proved as good as her word. She showed Luke how to make acorn flour when the wheat flour ran low, grinding the nuts she and Tala had gathered before the snow. She stretched the remaining meat with pine nuts and dried berries. Luke found himself learning things his own mother had never taught him. How to use every part of the rabbits he trapped. How to make tea from pine needles that kept the winter coughs away. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked one evening as she showed the girls how to weave snowshoes from strips of rawhide. "My grandmother," Nia said. She said knowledge weighs nothing, so carry as much as you can. The 5th day after the heavy snow, Luke was checking his trap line when he found the tracks. 3 men on horseback, heading straight for his cabin. The snow had stopped falling yesterday, making the trail clear as a road map. Luke abandoned the traps and moved fast, keeping to the trees. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from exertion, but from the cold knowledge that he'd left Nia and the girls alone, with only the old shotgun for protection. Careless. Damn careless. He reached the ridge above his cabin and dropped to his belly in the snow. 3 horses stood in the clearing. He recognized Miller's paint and Chapman's dun gelding. The 3rd belonged to Reynolds from the saloon. They were circling the cabin, looking for tracks, evidence. Through the cabin's single window, Luke could see Nia standing perfectly still in the shadows, shotgun ready. Good woman. The girls would be hidden in the root cellar as they'd planned for just such a moment. Miller dismounted, approached the door, knocked once, then again harder, called out something Luke couldn't hear at this distance. When no answer came, Miller tried the door. Locked. The 3 men conferred, gesturing toward the smokeless chimney. Luke had banked the fire before leaving, knowing smoke would give away their presence. Now that precaution might save them. The men seemed to be deciding the cabin was empty. After what seemed an eternity, the 3 remounted and rode back the way they'd come. Luke waited until they disappeared into the trees before moving, his legs stiff with cold and tension. Nia had the door open before he reached it, relief briefly cracking her composed expression. "They're gone," Luke said, stamping snow from his boots. "For now," she added. Luke nodded. "They think the place is empty." Snow bought us some time. Tala emerged from the root cellar, helping Winona up the ladder. Both girls looked to their mother for reassurance. "We are safe," Nia told them in Apache, then in English for Luke's benefit. "But they will return when snow melts." That night, with the girls asleep, Luke and Nia sat close to the fire, voices low. "When trail clears, you should go," Luke said, facing the hard truth. "Head south to Mexico, maybe. Army doesn't cross the border much." Nia's face revealed nothing, but her hand stilled on the deerskin she was working. "With 2 small children, in winter?" "Spring, then," Luke conceded. "But you can't stay here. They'll keep coming back. Eventually, they'll bring the army." "And you?" Her dark eyes studied him. "What happens to you if we are found here?" Luke hadn't allowed himself to dwell on that. Harboring fugitives, especially Apache, could mean prison. Or worse, if a trigger-happy militia decided to take matters into their own hands. He could walk away, sell the place, move further west, Idaho maybe, or up to Montana, start fresh where no one knew him. But the thought sat in his gut like spoiled meat. Running had never been his way. And leaving Nia and the girls to fend for themselves, he might as well pull the trigger himself. "Been thinking on that," he said slowly. "Come spring, if you still want to leave, I could take you part way. Make sure you get somewhere safe." Nia watched the fire, shadows playing across her face. "And if we wish to stay?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Luke studied her profile. Proud, strong, determined. In the firelight, he could see both the beauty that remained and the hardship that had carved new lines around her eyes and mouth. Like him, she'd lost a spouse, been forced to carry on alone. Unlike him, she'd had children depending on her strength. "Then I reckon we'd face whatever comes together," he said finally. Nia nodded, as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. "Together," she echoed. "This is good." January brought bitter cold but routine to the cabin. Mornings, Luke would check the traps while Nia taught the girls English words. Afternoons were for chores, splitting wood, repairing equipment, preserving what game they managed to catch. Evenings belonged to stories and skills shared around the fire. Luke found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining how to sight a rifle properly, or why certain wood burned better than others. In return, Nia showed him Apache ways, how to move silently through snow, how to read weather changes in the way smoke rose from the chimney. "No, like this," Luke demonstrated, guiding Nia's hands on the shotgun. "But tight against your shoulder, otherwise the kick'll leave you black and blue." Nia adjusted her stance, eyes narrowed in concentration. Her first shot had gone wild, scaring birds from trees 50 yards away. The second would be better. "Now breathe out slow and squeeze. Don't pull," Luke instructed. The shotgun roared. The target, a tin can on a stump, flew backward. "Ha!" Nia's face lit with satisfaction. "Not bad," Luke allowed, hiding his smile. Later, she led him through the woods, showing him how to walk without breaking crusty snow. "Roll foot from outside edge," she explained, demonstrating the strange gait. "Weight follows slowly." Luke tried, feeling awkward as a newborn colt. His first steps cracked loudly. Nia's eyes crinkled. "Perhaps you are too heavy for sneaking." "Perhaps you're enjoying this too much," Luke retorted, but there was no heat in it. The girls joined these lessons too. Tala took to the rifle with natural talent. Winona preferred snares and tracking, her small fingers nimble with knots. Luke's larger hands struggled to tie. One evening, Luke found himself whittling small animals for Winona: horses, rabbits, a bear standing on hind legs. Her delight at each new creation warmed something long cold inside him. "You are good with children," Nia observed, watching Winona arrange her wooden menagerie. Luke shrugged. "Just wood and a knife. Nothing special." "The making is ordinary," Nia agreed. "The giving is not." Luke didn't know how to answer that, so he just kept whittling, but something in his chest felt lighter than it had in years. February brought a brief thaw. Luke decided to risk a trip to town. Supplies were dangerously low, and he needed news of what Miller and his committee were planning. "Be back before dark," he told Nia, checking the Winchester's action. "Any trouble, fire 3 shots." The trail to Copper Creek was slushy but passable. Luke kept eyes moving, alert for ambush. The town seemed quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. No one on the street acknowledged him. Even the saloon fell silent when he passed. Luke tied his horse outside the general store and entered cautiously. Ellis was alone, sweeping the plank floor. "Thought you might have moved on," the storekeeper said, not meeting Luke's eyes. "Need supplies," Luke replied, placing his list on the counter. Ellis studied it, frowning. "That's a lot for one man." "I eat like 2, Luke said flatly. Ellis glanced toward the window, then lowered his voice. "Committee's been meeting regular. They've contacted the Army. Patrols expected soon as trails clear proper." Luke's face revealed nothing. "That so? Miller's boy's been watching your place. Says there's smoke from your chimney all day now. Says you never used to keep a fire going when you were out trapping." Ellis disappeared into the back room, returning with a canvas sack. Got these put aside. Couldn't sell 'em. Moth damage. He opened the sack to reveal blankets, their edges slightly frayed, but otherwise sound. Luke understood immediately. Appreciate it. Doc asked me to give you these too. Ellis placed a small package on the counter. Medicines for whoever might need them. Luke studied the storekeeper's face. Mighty generous. Some folks still remember when you pulled Dawson's boys from that mine collapse, Ellis said quietly, when everyone else said it was too dangerous. He began filling Luke's order, adding extra coffee and sugar without comment. Not everyone agrees with Miller's committee. Just not everyone's brave enough to say so. Luke returned to find the cabin transformed. Nia had scrubbed every surface, arranged fresh pine boughs in the old crockery jug, and somehow managed to make the worn furniture look intentional rather than haphazard. The girls had crafted small decorations from pine cones and bits of colored thread from Nia's sewing kit. "What's all this?" Luke asked, setting down his supplies. "Winona's birthday," Nia explained. "She is 8 winters today." The younger girl watched him shyly from behind her mother, clearly hoping for his approval of their efforts. "Well now," Luke said, kneeling to Winona's level. 8 years is something worth celebrating. From his pocket, he produced a small wooden horse, more detailed than his previous carvings. "Made this on the trail. Thought you might like it." Winona's face lit up as she accepted the gift, examining every curve and line with wonder. Tala leaned close to her sister. "What do you say in English?" "Thank you," Winona managed, the words heavily accented but clear. "You're welcome," Luke replied, oddly moved. That evening, they shared a feast of rabbit stew with dumplings. Nia had saved precious flour for the occasion. Luke contributed a small jar of honey he'd purchased from Ellis, earning gasps of delight from the girls who hadn't tasted anything sweet since fall. After, Nia sang Apache birthday songs while Luke sat awkwardly, uncertain how to participate in such family moments, but somehow knowing his presence mattered. As the girls finally dozed off, exhausted from celebration, Nia joined Luke by the fire. "You brought many supplies," she observed. "And news?" Luke nodded. "Army patrol coming when trails clear. Miller's boys been watching the place." Nia absorbed this without visible reaction. "Then spring will bring danger." "Spring brings what it brings," Luke said. "We'll face it." "As family?" Nia asked, her question gentle but direct. Luke stared into the fire, remembering Winona's face when she saw the wooden horse, Tala's pride in helping her sister speak English, the way the cabin now felt like a home again. "As family," he agreed, the words feeling right in a way he hadn't expected. March arrived with warmer days and the promise of spring. The snow receded from the valley, leaving mud and new growth in its wake. With trails now easily passable, Luke knew they lived on borrowed time. He made one more trip to town, hoping to learn when exactly the Army patrol would arrive. This time, he found Copper Creek changed. A military tent pitched behind the sheriff's office, horses with U.S. Army brands hitched outside the saloon. Luke nearly turned back, but need drove him forward. The flour was gone, the coffee too. They couldn't live on game alone. Luke had just finished loading supplies when a voice called from across the street. "That's him, Lieutenant. That's Mercer." Miller stood with a young Army officer and 2 soldiers. The officer, barely old enough to shave by the looks of him, approached with the stiff importance of fresh authority. "Mr. Mercer, Lieutenant Howard, United States Army." His hand rested on his holstered pistol. "I'd like to ask you some questions." Luke secured his supplies, movements deliberate. "About?" "We've received reports you're harboring Apache fugitives from the Whitewater Creek incident, specifically the wife and children of a war chief named Black Knife." Luke's face betrayed nothing, though the name struck like a physical blow. Black Knife had been notorious, raids on settlements from Texas to Arizona. If Nia was his widow, the situation was far worse than he'd imagined. "Don't know anything about that," Luke said evenly. "Several citizens claim they've seen smoke from your cabin all winter, more than one man would need." "Cold winter," Luke replied. "Kept the fire going when I was out trapping." Miller stepped forward. "He's lying, Lieutenant. My boy tracked him, saw a woman and children." The lieutenant studied Luke with cold efficiency. "Mr. Mercer, harboring enemies of the United States is treason. The penalty is severe. However, if you cooperate now, reveal their location, I'm authorized to show leniency." "Nothing to reveal," Luke maintained. The lieutenant sighed. "Very well, Corporal, detain Mr. Mercer." As a soldier moved forward, Doc Simmons emerged from his office across the street. "What's happening here?" he demanded. "Military business, Doctor," the lieutenant said dismissively. "This man saved half the people in this town when the mine collapsed," Doc argued. "He deserves better than public arrest on hearsay." "We have multiple witnesses," Miller interjected. "You have grudges and rumors," Doc countered. "Nothing more." As the argument continued, Luke assessed his options. 3 soldiers visible, possibly more nearby. The lieutenant was inexperienced, but eager to prove himself. Most townsfolk were watching from doorways, unwilling to intervene, but not supporting the arrest either. Doc caught Luke's eye briefly, then deliberately knocked over a water barrel. In the ensuing confusion, Luke vaulted onto his horse, kicked free of the hitching post, and galloped out of town. Shouts erupted behind him. A shot rang out but went wide. Luke bent low over his horse's neck, pushing for speed. He had maybe 30 minutes before they organized a proper pursuit. 30 minutes to reach the cabin, warn Nia, and decide their next move. Luke took the creek trail, risking the muddy footing for the cover it provided. His mind raced faster than his horse. Black Knife's widow. No wonder Nia had been so careful, so hesitant to trust. Her husband had been responsible for dozens of deaths on both sides of the border. Behind him, he heard hoofbeats, the pursuit already organized. The lieutenant was more efficient than Luke had given him credit for. Luke veered off the trail, taking a game path only locals knew. It would slow him down, but might throw off followers. The brush was thick here, branches whipping his face as he rode. His horse snorted in protest but pushed on. The sound of pursuit faded, then returned. They'd split up to cover more ground. Luke cursed under his breath. These weren't local militia, but trained soldiers. They wouldn't give up easily. He broke from the trees into a small clearing, then froze. Ahead, 2 mounted soldiers blocked the path. Behind him, more hoofbeats approached, trapped. Luke weighed his Winchester in one hand, considered his options. He could shoot, might take down 1 or 2 before they got him. But that would only confirm their suspicions, guarantee they'd sweep through to the cabin afterward. Nia and the girls would have no chance. Instead, he raised his hand slowly. "Looking for something, boys?" "Dismount," ordered the older soldier, rifle trained on Luke's chest. Luke complied, movements deliberate. "Mind telling me what this is about?" "Save it for the lieutenant," the soldier replied, as his companion moved to bind Luke's hands. Luke allowed it, watching, waiting. If they were focused on him, they weren't focused on finding the cabin. Every minute they spent with him was another minute for Nia to see the smoke from their campfires, to recognize the danger and flee. The soldiers escorted Luke to their camp, a clearing a mile from town where several tents had been erected. Lieutenant Howard waited, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Mercer, good of you to join us, however reluctantly." Luke said nothing, measuring the camp. 6 soldiers visible, possibly more. Escape would be difficult, if not impossible. "We've sent men to your cabin," Howard continued. "If there are Apache there, we'll find them." A chill ran through Luke. If Nia followed their emergency plan, she and the girls would be hidden in the cave behind the north ridge. But if she hadn't had warning, if she'd been out gathering early spring greens with the girls— "You're making a mistake," Luke said finally. "There are no Apache at my cabin." "Then you won't mind if we search it," Howard replied. "It's my property." "I mind." The lieutenant studied him. "Mr. Miller claims the woman is Black Knife's widow. Do you know what Black Knife did to settlers near Fort Bowie? What was left of them?" Luke met his gaze steadily. "I know war makes monsters of good men on both sides. These aren't soldiers, Mr. Mercer. They're savages who murder women and children." "Funny," Luke said, voice dangerously soft. "I was at Whitewater Creek after the army was done, saw plenty of Apache women and children dead. Who were the savages there?" Howard's face flushed. "You're on dangerous ground, Mercer." "Been there before," Luke replied. "Question is, Lieutenant, have you? You look awful young to be so certain about who deserves to live and who deserves to die." A commotion at the edge of camp interrupted them, soldiers returning, one carrying something small that caught the fading light. Luke's heart sank as he recognized Tala's carved wooden horse, the one he'd made for Winona's birthday. The soldier handed it to Howard. "Found this at the cabin, sir. Fresh ashes in the fireplace, too. They left in a hurry." Howard held up the carving, studying it, then turned to Luke. "Not Army issue, this. Looks like a child's toy to me." Luke said nothing, face impassive, despite the fear gripping his chest. Had they escaped? Or were Naya and the girls hiding somewhere, terrified, watching soldiers tear apart the place that had become their home? "Take him to the holding tent," Howard ordered. "Post a guard. At first light, we're going to track these Apache, and Mr. Mercer is going to help us, whether he wants to or not." Luke spent a cold, sleepless night under guard, his hands bound, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Dawn was just breaking when commotion erupted outside the tent. Raised voices, the sound of horses approaching. The young soldier guarding him peered outside, then quickly stepped away as the tent flap opened. Doc Simmons ducked inside, followed by Ellis from the general store. "You look like hell, Mercer," Doc observed dryly. "Feel worse," Luke admitted. "What are you doing here?" "Getting you out," Ellis said, producing a knife to cut Luke's bonds. "Before that lieutenant does something we'll all regret." "Howard won't just let me walk out," Luke pointed out. "Already handled," Doc said. "Sheriff Taylor's here with a county writ. Military has no jurisdiction over civilian matters without martial law being declared. They can search for Apache, but they can't hold you without charges." Luke rubbed his wrists as Ellis freed him. "Why are you helping me?" The storekeeper looked uncomfortable. "Miller's had it in for you since you refused to sell him water rights. This Apache business is just an excuse. And," Doc added, "some of us remember what real justice looks like. Now, we need to move fast." "Sheriff can only stall Howard so long." "They found evidence at my cabin," Luke said. "They know about Nia and the girls." Doc nodded grimly. "Figured as much. That's why Ellis brought a wagon. We're getting you out of the county today. There's a stage in Prescott that can take you to California." Luke shook his head. "Can't leave. Need to find them first." "Mercer, be reasonable," Doc urged. Army's got trackers. They'll find those Apache with or without you." "And then what?" Luke demanded. "Naya and those girls didn't hurt anyone. They're survivors, not raiders." Ellis and Doc exchanged glances. "You know where they might have gone?" Doc asked finally. Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. We had a plan. A place to meet if trouble came." "Then we'd better hurry," Ellis said. "Sheriff can't stall much longer. And once they realize you're gone, they'll tear this territory apart, looking for all of you." They emerged from the tent to find the camp in confusion. Sheriff Taylor stood arguing with Lieutenant Howard, waving papers in the young officer's face. Nearby, several townspeople had gathered, some supporting the sheriff, others clearly on the lieutenant's side. Miller and his son stood with the military men, faces tight with anger. "This is a military operation," Howard was insisting. "These Apache are enemies of the United States government." "And this is my county," Sheriff Taylor countered. "You've got no evidence connecting Mercer to any crime except the word of men with personal grudges." The argument paused as heads turned toward Luke, flanked by Doc and Ellis. Howard's face darkened. "Who released this prisoner?" he demanded. "I did," Sheriff Taylor said. "With legal authority, your commander at Fort Whipple will recognize, Lieutenant." Miller pushed forward. "He's harboring Apache, Sheriff. My boy saw them with his own eyes." "Your boy's been trespassing," Luke said evenly. "And lying about what he saw." The crowd murmured, taking sides. Luke recognized faces. Men he'd worked with, women whose children he'd helped deliver alongside Doc during hard births. Some wouldn't meet his eyes. Others nodded slightly, showing support. Reverend Parker stepped forward. "Perhaps we should all calm down. There are good people on both sides of this matter." "There aren't two sides to treason," Miller spat. "There aren't two sides to Christian charity either," Doc retorted. "Or have you forgotten that part of Sunday service, Miller?" Old Jenkins hobbled forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "I fought Apache back in '53. Lost good friends to raids." The crowd quieted, respecting the old man's experience. "But I never saw warrior women with babies doing the raiding, and I never saw the point in making orphans, no matter what color they are." Others joined in, some supporting Jenkins, others backing Miller. The community was fracturing before their eyes. Lieutenant Howard raised his voice. "Enough! This is a military matter now. Mercer, you're coming with us to help locate these Apache. Sheriff, unless you want to be charged with obstruction, I suggest you stand down." The standoff might have turned ugly if not for the rider who galloped into camp, mud-splattered and breathless, one of Howard's scouts. "Lieutenant, Apache signs heading south. Multiple individuals, at least one child. Trails fresh, no more than a few hours old." Howard immediately shifted focus. "Mount up. We move now." In the confusion that followed, Sheriff Taylor managed to pull Luke, Doc, and Ellis aside, hustling them toward Ellis's wagon at the edge of camp. "You've got maybe 10 minutes before they realize you're gone," the sheriff muttered. "Make them count." Once they were clear of camp, Luke spoke. "The trail heading south is a false one." Nia would have gone east toward the high caves. "How can you be sure?" Ellis asked, urging his horses faster. "Because I taught her that trick myself," Luke said with grim satisfaction. "Leave obvious signs in the wrong direction, then double back." Doc nodded approvingly. "Howard's young. He'll follow the clear trail." "Not for long," Luke cautioned. "He'll figure it out eventually." "What's your plan?" Sheriff Taylor asked. Luke considered. "Get to Nia and the girls first, then head north into the mountains. Army won't follow too far. They've got other duties." "You'll need supplies," Ellis said. "I've got food, ammunition, and blankets in the wagon." "And I've got medicines," Doc added. "Plus a map of the old mining trails. Army doesn't know them." Luke studied these men, acquaintances who'd become allies, perhaps even friends. "Why are you risking yourselves for this?" Sheriff Taylor answered first. "Spent 20 years upholding the law." "Sometimes the law and justice ain't the same thing." "Miller's been pushing folks around too long," Ellis added, "using fear to get his way." Doc's answer was simplest. "Because it's right." Luke nodded, humbled by their courage. "I won't forget this. Just find those girls and their mother," Doc said. "Get them somewhere safe." The wagon rattled over the uneven ground, heading east toward the foothills. Behind them, dust rose from the Army patrol riding south, following the Falls Trail. For now, they had an advantage, but Luke knew it wouldn't last long. "We'll need more help," he said grimly. "This isn't over." The eastern caves were actually old mine entrances, abandoned years ago when the silver played out. Luke had shown them to Nia during the winter, defensible positions with hidden springs nearby. If she'd followed their emergency plan, that's where she would have taken the girls. As they approached the foothills, Luke took the lead on horseback, leaving the others with the wagon in a sheltered draw. He moved cautiously, watching for signs only he would recognize: a bent twig, stones arranged in a pattern Nia had taught him. There, a single hawk feather stuck vertically in the ground, their signal. Luke dismounted, approaching the rock face carefully. "Nia," he called softly. "It's Luke." Silence. Then a child's voice. "Winona." "Luke!" Before he could react, the girl burst from behind a boulder, running toward him. He caught her automatically, surprised by the fierceness of her embrace. Tala appeared next, more cautious but relief evident in her face. And finally, Nia, a rifle in her hands, expression guarded until she confirmed he was alone. "The soldiers?" she asked, lowering the weapon. "Following a false trail south, for now." Luke set Winona down gently. "You did good, just like we planned." Nia nodded, but her eyes held questions. "They know who I am?" "They say you're Black Knife's widow." Her face hardened. "And you believe this?" "Doesn't matter what I believe," Luke said. "Matters what I know, and I know you and these girls deserve a chance." Nia studied him, then nodded once. "What now?" "Friends are waiting with supplies. We head north, into the mountains. Army won't follow far." "And then?" Luke hadn't thought beyond immediate survival. "Find somewhere safe. Start over." Tala spoke up. "Together?" The question hung in the air. Before Luke could answer, a shot echoed through the canyon, then another. "That's coming from where we left the wagon," Luke said, heart sinking. "Miller must have figured out the ruse and split his forces." Nia was already gathering their few possessions. "We cannot leave your friends." They crept back toward the draw where Doc, Ellis, and the sheriff waited. Luke kept the girls and Nia behind him, moving from cover to cover. As they neared, voices became clear. Miller's unmistakable angry tones, the sheriff's measured responses. "You're harboring fugitives, Taylor. That's a hanging offense." "No one's been convicted of anything, Miller. We're just helping a neighbor in need." From their vantage point, Luke could see the standoff. Miller and his sons with rifles ready, facing the sheriff, Doc, and Ellis, who stood protectively in front of the wagon. No sign of the army yet. "Stay here," Luke whispered to Nia and the girls, then moved forward alone, Winchester ready. "Miller!" he called, stepping into view from behind a boulder. All heads turned. Miller's rifle swung toward him. "Where are they, Mercer?" The Apache woman and her brats? Gone, Luke lied. Headed north while you boys were playing soldier. Miller's face twisted with anger. You're lying. Always were too soft on Indians. And you were always too eager for other people's property, Luke countered. This isn't about Apache. It's about my water rights, always has been. Several of Miller's supporters exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the righteous cause they'd been promised. You threatening me, Mercer? Miller demanded, finger tightening on his trigger. No threat, Luke replied calmly. Just truth. You've been using fear to get what you want for years, making people choose sides against their neighbors. To everyone's surprise, Jenkins and several other townspeople emerged from the brush behind Luke. He's right, Miller, Jenkins said, his old voice strong despite his frail appearance. You've pushed this town around long enough. You're defending Apache raiders? Miller sputtered. I'm defending the right of folks to be judged by what they do, not who they are, Jenkins replied. Something you might think on. One by one, Miller's supporters lowered their weapons, stepping back. Even his younger son looked uncertain. You're making a mistake, Miller warned them all. When the army gets here, they won't find anything but neighbors helping neighbors, Sheriff Taylor interrupted, unless you plan to shoot us all. Miller's standoff ended not with violence, but with the slow disintegration of his support. Even his sons eventually lowered their rifles, unwilling to stand against the entire community. When Lieutenant Howard finally arrived, following the correct trail, he found a united town protecting their own. These settlers were helping me repair my cabin after winter damage, Luke explained, as townsfolk nodded agreement. No Apache here, Lieutenant, just neighbors lending a hand. Howard was suspicious, but without evidence or local support, military intervention was politically difficult. Reluctantly, he withdrew his men, promising to return if new evidence emerged. That evening, gathered around a fire at Doc's ranch outside town, Luke and Nia faced their supporters. The army will be back eventually, Sheriff Taylor warned. Howard's young, but not stupid. We'll be gone by then, Luke said. North to Montana Territory, perhaps. You'll need papers, Doc pointed out, for Nia and the girls. Ellis cleared his throat. My sister in Sacramento. Her husband works for the county clerk. He might help. Arrangements could be made. What arrangements? Luke asked. Doc and Ellis exchanged glances. Marriage license for one, Doc said. Adoption papers for the girls. Make things legal. Luke looked at Nia, whose face remained carefully neutral. That would be her decision, he said quietly. Our decision, Nia corrected, as family. 2 months later, with spring in full bloom, Luke, Nia, and the girls left Arizona Territory with new papers, new names, and the blessing of those who had stood with them. Miller had lost not just the battle, but his standing in the community, his manipulation exposed for what it was. As their wagon crested the northern ridge, Luke glanced back at the cabin that had been his solitary home for 5 years. Now it represented something far different, the place where a broken man and a desperate woman had found not just shelter, but healing, where 4 separate lives had become one family. You know, thinking back on Luke and Nia's story reminds me of something my daddy used to say. Sometimes the family you choose means more than the family you're born to. Luke Mercer wasn't looking to be anybody's husband or father when that winter began. Nia wasn't expecting to find safety with a white man after all she'd lost. But sometimes the good Lord puts people in your path for reasons you can't see until much later. What strikes me most about their tale isn't the danger they faced, though that was real enough, but how ordinary folks found extraordinary courage when it mattered. Doc and Ellis and Sheriff Taylor, They weren't heroes from some dime novel. They were just men who'd spent their lives in that dusty little settlement, doing their jobs, minding their business, until the day came when minding their business wasn't enough anymore. Old Jenkins had it right. We don't judge folks by who they are, but by what they do. Miller had spent years wrapping his greed in fine words about safety and protection, using fear to turn neighbor against neighbor. It took one man's stubborn decency to show the town what they'd become, and what they could be instead. I've seen it happen in my own time. Folks getting caught up in fear until they forget who they really are, what they truly value. And I've seen how one person standing firm on what's right can remind others of their better selves, like ripples in a pond, spreading outward. That's the thing about principles. They don't mean much until they cost you something. Luke could have walked away, could have saved himself a world of trouble. But there are some things a man can't live with, some compromises that hollow you out from the inside if you make them. I reckon we all face moments like that in our lives, moments when we have to decide what kind of person we want to be, whether we'll bow to fear or stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Luke and Naya found their way forward not because the path was easy, but because they walked it together. That's what family really means. Not just blood or names on paper, but the people who stand beside you when the chips are down, who see your worth when others don't, who choose you every day. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth remembering in these troubled times.